look at you?
We'll be on camera.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Look at me in combination with
Okay.
everybody.
Okay.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the SDG Pavilion here at COP30 in Belém, Brazil. My name is Ariel Alexevich with the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, here with another fireside chat with a special guest. And we're very happy to have with us Ms. Aluki Kotierk, who is of the Inuit in what is now known as Canada. And she is chairperson of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so pleased to be here with you all.
Great. And so I'm wondering if you can first tell us a little bit about, we're here at the climate conference. Can you tell us about some of the climate challenges facing the Inuit?
Well, I think people often, when they're talking about climate change, often think about the Arctic because of the course of the melting ice. And we know that when the ice is melting, it creates hazardous experiences for hunters because the ice is thinner. And then not only is it challenging for hunters, but it's also challenging for animals because as the ice melts, it becomes more not the way people have had it before, right? So people have to learn new migration routes or learn new techniques when they're out on the ice.
Yes, thank you. And what do you think are some of the ways that Arctic people are coping with these challenges, and what can a forum like COP or these global forums do to promote their solutions and new solutions?
Well, I think Inuit are very organized. There's the Inuit Circumpolar Council that has membership of Inuit all across the Circumpolar Arctic. And so they come together and have a general assembly and discuss about the priorities and objectives that they have over the 4-year period. So I think that's really helpful. One of the things that recently the Inuit Circumpolar Council has put out in terms of things that they need addressed in terms of climate change, I think that I'd like to speak about is that of direct access to financing. Because often when we're thinking about direct access to financing for Indigenous peoples, we know that it's necessary that all Indigenous peoples globally are able to access this financing. And the thing is that the way things are structured is that financing is often geared towards countries that are developing, and Inuit are across the Circumpolar Arctic are residing in developed countries, whether it be Alaska, Greenland, Canada, and so they're not able to access that direct financing. However, when you look at the statistics of Inuit communities, because I think the assumption is that the developed state will take care of the needs of these Indigenous peoples in their countries. But the reality is that when you look at the statistics of Indigenous peoples in developed countries, you can see that it's very comparable to those Indigenous peoples globally.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And Ms. Chairperson, could you tell us a little bit about how women in particular who have been driving so many climate solutions can be more involved in these processes particularly?
Well, I've had the great fortune of being here in Belém, Brazil this past week. And during this week, I've been able to participate and listen in to a global summit on Indigenous peoples and Indigenous youth. And so over a 2-day period, it was incredible. Indigenous women and youth from all 7 social cultural regions came together and were able to come out with a statement in 2 days. And so I think there's a great richness that Indigenous women and youth can provide to the discussion on climate change. And many documents that we produce as Indigenous peoples are living documents. So over time, this document that was produced at this global summit will be enriched and continue to capture thoughts and views and priorities of Indigenous women.
Awesome. And you brought up the topic of young people and youth, and certainly there are a lot of young people here in Belém, but I'm wondering what sort of support do they need from governments or from other kinds of stakeholders, other civil society groups that can really empower Indigenous youth to have meaningful contributions?
Thank you so much for that question. I love talking about youth because I think that as Indigenous peoples globally, many of us come from smaller communities. And sometimes going to an international conference such as this Conference of the Parties for Climate Change can be overwhelming. Not only are there so many people, there's so many different languages, and it's a different climate. I mean, for me here in Belém, it's just incredibly hot and humid, right? And I think many of us are feeling that. So it can be quite intimidating when you're coming from a small Indigenous community to be going to such big international spaces. So I would encourage states, I would encourage Indigenous people's organizations, I would encourage non-governmental organizations to make space to bring Indigenous youth with them to experience it. Because I think so much of the experiential learning is something that can change the path, the trajectory of a person. And so it makes, by being exposed to it, you start realizing it's not as intimidating as it first feels, and it's not as overwhelming because you start to make connections with people that you meet, and over time you create a network of support. And so I think it's really important that Indigenous youth are given that opportunity to experience it, even if they're not voicing anything at first, but over time it becomes something as part of their life work. Because I think it so often becomes a responsibility. You start feeling like you have to contribute because you know a little bit more than someone else in your own community.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to give spaces like the SDG Pavilion here to talk to a lot of youth, and we've been doing that this week, and it's been great to hear from them.
Excellent.
Yeah, but I would love to ask you, we are here in the Amazon, and I just wonder how it feels to you. You have a lot of experience with the Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues, a lot of New York-based events, but here we are in the Amazon. Does that feel different to you?
Well, I think one of the things that has struck me is the variety, the diversity of Indigenous peoples, because at this COP, there's been so many Indigenous peoples, and like I say, I've been to the Global Summit of Indigenous Women and Youth, and there are Indigenous peoples from all over the globe, and you can see such a large presence as well. There's the Aldea, where there's Indigenous peoples with their booths and the experiences. I went the other day to one of their homes where the houses where they have ancestral house, and there were ceremonies there, and so I was able to take part in that. And so I think it's just incredible to be so surrounded by Indigenous peoples from the Amazon at this COP.
Yes, excellent. And then just as a final question, I'd love to ask you just what is your call to action for this COP30? What's your call to action for the fellow delegates here? What would you like to see?
So I've been really inspired by the voice of Indigenous peoples, and I think it's been amplified at this COP. So I know that Indigenous peoples at different panels that I've been at have said, hear us. We can't have a dialogue where our voices are not heard. So I think that would be my call to action. Listen, find out what Indigenous peoples are saying, and figure out how you can help incorporate that into the action that you'll be taking.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chairperson, and I hope that everyone watching there listens to Indigenous people. Watch this, share this interview, and keep tuning in for more content from the SDG Pavilion and all of the Indigenous programming happening at the COP. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Kuya naming.